All right, all right. I love that new countdown timer there. It gives us a little more gravitas to the show. Uh, wow, welcome to the fifth episode of In Your Element with Ardis and Eric. My name is Eric Stoller. I'm the VP of Product Strategy for Element451. As always, I am joined by our basketball-loving founder and CEO, Ardis Kadiu. As you know, Element451, leading student engagement CRM out there, could not help your Brooklyn basketball team win the NBA championship. However, I'm sure you're very happy for Milwaukee.
Yes, just twist that knife a little bit more, Eric. Yes, I'm extremely happy for Milwaukee. It's been 50 years since they won another major championship, so it was well deserving. My wife compared it to the Yankees when they went through a dry spell there for quite a while, but she said, "Oh, it's not as bad as the Yankees. I mean, it's not the Yankees is not as bad as Milwaukee." Look, I felt a little bit. Like I needed to root against them, but they at the end they had the better team, and their stars rose up. So the Greek Freak, he kind of took over, and it became a team play, and everybody contributed. So it was exciting. It was exciting it was a great game. So for those basketball fans out there.
I love basketball. I just have little kids, and I'm just like they dominate my entire headspace. So missed that as well. It's a good thing there was other like breaking news out there. But speaking of news, today is our special news episode. We sort of going to change up the format a little bit. So going to do two shows now per week. One on all things amazing and great and fully featured with Element451 and our technology, and the other is sort of a news. Our take on kind of what's going on, current events in higher education. And as always, we're live on Element451's Facebook page, LinkedIn, Twitter, and my mom's Commodore 64, which is, an amazing piece of technology. So I guess, starting off here, Ardis, like what's new in higher ed? What have you been reading? What have you been seeing?
So there's a lot of things. One of the things that gets me really excited is some news coming out of some diversity news coming out of University of California, where they had a really diverse freshman class this year, and they're attributing a lot of that to the elimination of standardized testing scores. So, of course, there can be a number of different factors there as well, but that is being given the most significant contribution to the elimination of that testing scores. As we know, test scores, a lot of schools went test optional last year, and a lot of schools have been doing this for quite a bit now. So what's happening is a number of different things. Testing requires access. There's a lot of test prep that needs to happen. There's the whole idea of going to a center and actually taking the test. And we know that there's different populations that are not benefiting from that other gate, for example, to higher education. So the more gates that we have, the harder it becomes for folks to get in there. And of course, higher education has traditionally been, really guarded. And of course, there is the entrance, there's the entrance essays and the whole admissions process. However, that admissions process has been streamlined over the past few years, and there's a trend in moving more and more towards that direction. And right. The schools who are moving more towards eliminating those different gates and making it more streamlined for students, they're the ones who are benefiting, and not just by an increase in the amount of students that they're getting, but also the diversity of those students that they're getting as well, just because it becomes really, really difficult for this marginalized or this, different populations that are underrepresented as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those barriers to entry, have been sort of one thing kind of, dropped and moved or sort of pushed aside, or, it's all about sort of getting rid of those structures that inhibit access. And I think that, just some of the stats from this Inside Higher Ed article here, are pretty groundbreaking in the sense of, the number of underrepresented students increasing from, 33,000 to 36,000, up from, 42% last year. It's really amazing in terms of that kind of growth. And it goes to show you that some of the standardized tests, while, in the past there is some utility there, they're also a pretty major factor in sort of even who applies, because, if you don't have that test and a school requires that test, that's a hurdle. And, there's a whole industry set up around test prep and, sort of selling these tests as sort of the achievement. I mean, everybody goes through high school and is preparing for it. I mean, who didn't take? I think it was like the junior SATs, and I grew up in the Midwest, so I took the ACT. I never had to dabble with the actual SAT, but I was an ACT person, and so I remember driving literally up the highway from my parents' house, and you could see like ACT headquarters, right? Because it's located in Iowa. So you'd see this sign, ACT or whatever. And so, for California, a very diverse state, in terms of population, demographics, it's good news. And so it'll be interesting to see how test optional as kind of a movement continues. I know a lot of institutions just chose during the pandemic to go test optional because to them, it was the best move for the institution as well as for students. And I think applications are up.
Yeah, well, students couldn't get, there was no test. Like,
yeah, they were getting canceled. They were getting canceled constantly.
Yeah. Exactly. So there was I was reading some stats in terms of the acceleration of e-commerce. I think I mentioned this before in one of the other episodes, but we saw a 10-year acceleration in just a span of 3 months. And we're seeing something very similar here, where higher education is being forced to go through this. And now that, that change happened, everybody's looking at it is like, well, maybe this is a good thing. So how do we adapt going forward, where tests aren't necessarily the measure of student qualifications? How do we evaluate those students, and how do we make that admissions process easier for those students? And how do we kind of pull in different data points that kind of signify students' readiness, rather than looking at tests, but looking at other academic, markers, anything from, their GPA to longevity in the courses that they took in high school, but then not just necessarily high school, but then other, extracurriculars, and so on and so forth. Obviously, with the shrinking budgets and with the shrinking resources and the admissions counselors have, and the admissions offices have, looking at things that are not very standardized around preparedness becomes so difficult. But this is the new world that we're moving into. So we need to look at those different things, and we need to have systems in place, and we need to have technology in place, and all of these need to move together, right? Obviously for a better outcome, as we can see here.
Yeah, it's much more of a holistic kind of admissions process, encompassing a lot more things. And I think it's interesting too, when you think about sort of the University of California system getting more diverse without, that's a great mug you've got there, sir. But the University of California system getting more diverse without the SATs. Of course, more students applied for your universities, I believe the data has shown. And so, the impact on community colleges has been interesting as well, because community college enrollment during the pandemic decreased significantly. And so, there's some interesting sort of opportunities as barriers are removed, but what are these sort of impacts on other aspects of higher education? And so I think we're going to start to see some really interesting moves by community colleges to sort of amplify their recruitment, admissions, and sort of like sophistication of their efforts. Because in many ways now, if a more full, especially like large R1 institutions, private institutions, et cetera, a lot of them go, SAT or ACT optional, everyone's kind of competing for the same students.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that's becoming really interesting is that community colleges are actually playing a very different. Their role is transforming. They're becoming more and more these feeder schools to the traditional 4-year colleges, and not just because of their they're just 2 years, but also students needing that additional time or preparedness, and then taking those courses that are kind of the foundation and
Mm-hmm.
getting to a standardized place. So we're seeing the transfer populations from our own partners as well as this kind of industry. We're seeing the transfer populations and the opportunity for transfer students increasing tremendously, whereas the undergraduate or the traditional high school populations is decreasing. So how do you grow your enrollment if you can't, if the pool is shrinking and everybody is competing for the same high school students? Well, the answer is, how do you get more transfer students? Transfer students are the answer for a lot of that. Obviously, we can talk about international, but one of the other articles which is really interesting is University of Pennsylvania, the system, they are consolidating, and the reasons for consolidating is this, this is news as well. They voted to consolidate from 6 to 2 schools, and the reason for that is the decline in enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a decline in the amount of students in the Northeast specifically. Obviously, there are some areas, for example, in the Southeast, for example, or kind of the South that's increasing. But over the next few years, what's going to happen is that's also, those high school students are decreasing. So again, schools are beginning to consolidate. I think Vermont was another one, that another state in New Hampshire. Like all those systems are thinking about how can we be more efficient, how our budgets are shrinking, how can we kind of consolidate these schools. And right now we're talking about publics, but this is very, very similar on the privates as well, where they're not able to hit those enrollment goals. And as you see this happening, you're wondering, well, how do we build better? How do we make sure that we're providing the best programs, but then also how do we attract those students to those programs? And one other article that was really interesting was, let me pop that open, was this idea of how some schools are within the same states. They are working together, community colleges and the 4-year privates, for example. They're building these consortiums and they're building this this system, so they have a better a better mechanism for pathways for students to go from the community college to that 4-year degree and kind of the outcomes as well.
And Victoria, could you share Ardis's screen? I don't think it's coming up on the
let me see if I can. Yeah. Let me see if I can open that. Give me 1 second here. I don't have it popped open, but
no worries. There's lots of technology here for this show, folks. It's a lot of. We had this paneling installed yesterday, just custom. Now I'm actually in an undisclosed location, but I think that when you talk about things like dual enrollment and sort of speeding up pathways between community colleges and universities, there's huge lift there for students. It's all about sort of enabling and amplifying student success. And so, we'll try to get that. Ardis, if you want to just share that in the Google Doc, I can put it up on my screen, no problem.
Sure. I mean, this was just an article that was more of a Q&A, but you can definitely see, and here's it on the chat link.
Yep, no problem. I'll get that fired up here. I mean, I think that the whole trying to recruit, different populations of students in terms of transfer students, because clearly, there's the birth rate decline that's coming. If you look at some of the stats around, there aren't going to be as many high school graduates, and so the other thing is, what used to be sort of traditional, going from high school into college. either community college or 4-year, and there's a lot of different options now for people to access higher education. I think there's a lot of sort of workforce development, non-traditional degree programs, and a lot of those are now being placed sort of within community colleges as well as within 4-year institutions. And so the landscape of what higher education looks like, it was already on the move and changing quite a bit before the pandemic. The pandemic, like you said, Ardis, has kind of accelerated things quite a bit. But here's that article, 14 private colleges plan to improve community college transfer. It's about, those barriers to entry. Again, that's kind of the theme of today's show, is eliminating those barriers and making things easier for students.
Yeah, so this is really interesting because of course, everybody understands that there's a natural pathway from a community college to a 4-year bachelor's or master's degree, or BS or MS or whatever, BA degree. But essentially giving the students that pathway and having these predefined ways that you can ask a student to enroll in a community college, and then having that degree outcome right there and then, it becomes a lot easier. So making those transitions easier, those pathways easier. I do have to plug in also some of so Element is also growing in this area as well. So we're seeing non-traditional degree completion and kind of other schools. So for example, Rivet School, they are one of our Element clients, and they have seen tremendous growth as well. They're in the West Coast also. We just signed another similar kind of career-oriented Rapid Ascent Academy, which deals with cybersecurity, and all of these programs around specific areas of education are increasing because of the connection, because of this idea that education is not everybody follows the traditional path to education, right? So as opportunities are increasing, as like you mentioned, Eric, workforce development is becoming more center stage, there's a void, and there's going to be a lot of new players coming on board and filling those voids because of the I think there's a lack of speed in moving towards that. So another area where perhaps higher education is just a little bit slower in moving in that direction is kind of the speed of either program development or the agility in which they can kind of package their courses. And so you see players that are coming in, that are non-traditional institutions able to provide, fill that void, like Rivet School or a Rapid Ascent, and those are just the Element partners, but there's just a lot more of this institutions out there.
Yeah, well, it's the trend, right? And you see even consolidation between things like 2U, that is a huge OPM, purchasing or acquiring, I'm not sure the exact language, but edX, because again, you're still going to have your 4-year brick and mortar, you're still going to have your on-campus experience, but the pandemic really, it fast-tracked things that were already in progress. But I saw the University of Florida, for example, they're going to have their largest, I think, online class ever, because one, they were already doing a lot of really innovative things with online learning, but two, a lot of students realized, well, hey, I can have a pretty decent experience remotely. Yeah. And I don't have to go live in a residence hall, or I don't have to move wherever. And I'm assuming, a lot of faculty, whether they wanted to or not, they had to get on board with teaching remotely and teaching online. And so the learning that took place there, like from the faculty staff side of things, had to have been tremendous. And so I think you're going to see a lot more schools realize, how are we going to deploy this? How are we going to package it, like you said? And then we haven't even talked about international student recruitment. I think in terms of what is that going to look like going forward? Because international students in the U.S. went down, obviously during the pandemic. Travel was restricted, et cetera. That's going to presumably rebound, and so it's going to be a really interesting world. By the way, I did put up our recent press release just because we gotta brag and pat ourselves on the shoulder a little bit here in terms of our increase in our customer base and just sort of what schools are saying about us and how we're positioning ourselves. We'll be sharing that out on social later. But there's one other thing I think we should probably talk about today. That was the technology landscape. It's a very massive graphic here. Let me open it up. Yeah,
as technologists, I think this chart, looking at all the different charts around different industries, and of course, it's pretty dense, but you should see some of the ad tech and fintech charts. Like there's really no, like, you need a magnifying glass to get to see how many different technologies are there. And it becomes really, really, like, as the choice of technology increases, there's no excuse anymore to kind of use antiquated technology or to just not use anything. It's like technology is becoming a superpower, so to speak. So,
well, it's also about the evolution of features and capabilities within systems and what's available, and then new sort of categories emerge. I remember when this higher ed technology landscape first came out, it wasn't nearly as sort of flushed out as it currently is. And I think I'll just go not hide or I'm not going to show my screen so we can just have a quick chat here about it a little bit more. But I think that, the thing is right now we're, at Element451, we're in the CRM side of things, the constituent relationship management solution, which is a really long title. But there's other areas, of course, like student engagement solutions and a lot of things around retention and persistence. And I think that's where, at some point you're going to see a lot of different, our logo is going to be sort of all over the place, peppered around on those landscapes because of all the capabilities. Another really interesting tech landscape report that I like is the Holland IQ one, and how they sort of break things out beyond sort of they get into teaching and learning a lot more as well with some of the stuff that they share. And I think they're coming out with some reports or data in the next couple of weeks. And so we'll probably share that on one of our news episodes. But I'd say that, today's theme has definitely been about sort of overcoming barriers to entry and the changing landscape of higher ed with just a sprinkling of technology. Ardis, any final thoughts as we wrap up today's show?
No, I mean, access is very dear to me. As a first generation kind of college student here in the U.S., where coming from a different country, it was and not necessarily having that support that a lot of students have with their family have gone through that process. I understand and I sympathize with a lot of students that don't have that support. It's really difficult to navigate the financial process. It's really difficult to navigate even the admissions process in terms of what the requirements and testing and the timing and of all these different things. And when you think about it, access, it's much more than just saying, hey, we're going to give you a scholarship. But if you're not able to help students through that process, or to be able to let them know that there is funding available and all these different things, it just becomes very prohibitive. So a lot of students just drop off, and I can sympathize with a lot of that. Obviously, I grinded it out and I went through that process, and very successful right now. But it's been a passion of mine, and it hits home when folks talk about access, because access is not just about getting folks who cannot afford education money. It's not just about that. It's about changing the perspective and changing the process, making sure that they can actually know about the opportunities, making sure that they are guided through the process, making sure that they don't fall through off the process. So all of these things are part of access. It's not just the money and the scholarship. There's a lot of scholarships out there. There's a lot of funding, but
Well, it's not just about getting your foot in the door. It's not just about the acceptance letter.
Exactly.
Student success, it begins before that happens, and it continues.
We can have
throughout.
another.
That's a massive show.
There.
I think that maybe this is part one, and part two will be sort of student success while you're at an institution. But for now, we'll wrap it up. It's been another episode of In Your Element with Ardis and Eric. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.